Man WHO saved twin girls from trash bin gets incredible reward 20 years later. The cold wind howled through the deserted alleyway as Detective Samuel Hayes pulled his coat tighter around his body. It was an ordinary night, at least. It should have been. He had just finished his late shift at the precinct and was heading home. The soft glow of the streetlights barely piercing the thick fog rolling over the city. Then, he heard it. A faint, muffled cry. He stopped in his tracks, his pulse quickening. It wasn't the sound of a stray cat or a distant siren. This was different. It was fragile, desperate, human. Samuel turned, his eyes scanning the dimly lit alley. Then he saw it, a rusted, dented trash bin tipped slightly to the side. The cries were coming from inside. With a sense of urgency, he rushed forward, his breath visible in the cold night air. He hesitated for only a second before yanking off the lid. What he saw made his heart stop. Two tiny babies, barely newborns, wrapped in thin, tattered blankets. Their little faces were red, their tiny hands trembling against the icy air. They were twins, identical, with soft curls on their foreheads and deep brown eyes brimming with tears. Samuel's hands shook as he scooped them up, feeling their frail bodies shivering against his warmth. He looked around, but the alley was empty. No sign of a mother. No note, nothing, just the cold, the darkness, and these two abandoned lives. In that moment, Samuel knew he couldn't walk away. He took them to the nearest hospital, staying by their side as doctors rushed them into care. He found himself pacing outside the neonatal unit, his heart heavy with questions. Who could leave them like that? Would they survive? Would they ever know how close they came to being lost forever? The days passed, and Samuel found himself visiting them every evening after work. He watched as they grew stronger, their tiny hands gripping his finger, their cries turning into soft coos when he spoke to them. He had never been a father, never imagined himself as one. But something about these girls, something about the way they looked at him, made him feel like he was meant to be here. So, he made a choice. Against all odds, against the skepticism of social workers. He fought for them. He adopted them. He named them Hope and Grace. And for the next 20 years, he gave them the life they were never meant to have. But what Samuel didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that fate had something extraordinary in store for him. Because 20 years later, the twin girls he saved would return, with a reward beyond his wildest dreams. Samuel Hayes had never regretted his decision. Raising Hope and Grace had been the greatest challenge and the greatest joy of his life. He had sacrificed everything for them. His bachelor lifestyle, his savings, even promotions at work, because he wanted to be there for every milestone. Their first steps, their first words, their first day of school. And now, 20 years later, they were gone. Not gone in the tragic sense. No, Hope was in medical school, training to become a doctor. Grace had moved overseas, pursuing her dream of becoming a concert pianist. They had grown into remarkable young women. And though Samuel was proud, his house had never felt emptier. The echo of their laughter had faded. The walls no longer held crayon scribbles. The dining table, once crowded with schoolbooks and late-night snacks, was now bare. Samuel had never told them the full story of how he found them. He never wanted them to feel like victims, like charity cases. To him, they were simply his daughters. But tonight, that would change. As he sat in his dimly lit living room, sipping his usual cup of black coffee, his phone buzzed. Hope's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart," he answered with a tired smile. "Dad," her voice was shaking. "You need to be ready by 7. Someone's picking you up." Samuel frowned. "Picking me up? For what?" "Just trust me." She paused, her voice thick with emotion. "And wear something nice." The line went dead before he could ask more. Something about her tone unsettled him. At exactly 7, a sleek black car pulled up outside his modest home. A chauffeur in a crisp suit stepped out, holding the door open. "Mr. Hayes," the man greeted. "Please, come with me." Samuel hesitated. He had never been one for luxury. Never been one to be chauffeured anywhere. But curiosity, and something deeper, something unexplainable, pushed him forward. The drive was long, silent. The city lights blurred past the window as they left behind the familiar streets and entered an area Samuel had never been to before. Finally, the car pulled into a grand estate. The kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. With towering gates and sprawling gardens. Samuel's heart pounded. What was this? The driver opened the door. And as Samuel stepped out, his breath hitched. Standing in front of him, radiant in an elegant evening gown, was Hope. Beside her, in a flowing silk dress, was Grace. And they weren't alone. A crowd of people stood behind them, men and women in suits. Cameras flashing, microphones held at the ready. The moment Samuel took a step forward, applause erupted. What is this? He whispered, his voice barely audible over the clapping. Hope and Grace shared a knowing glance before stepping forward. Dad, Grace said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. Tonight, we tell the world what you did for us. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Hope reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. You saved us, she whispered. Now it's time for the world to know. Samuel had faced criminals, solved impossible cases, and walked through fire for the people he loved. But in that moment, standing before a crowd that had gathered for him, he had never been more afraid. The applause thundered around Samuel, but his mind was spinning. The cameras, the lights, the sheer number of people staring at him. For a man who had spent most of his life chasing criminals through dark alleys, standing under this spotlight felt unnatural. Hope, Grace, he murmured, his throat tight. What is this? Hope wiped away a tear and gestured toward the stage behind them. A massive screen flickered to life, showing a grainy, time-worn image. Samuel's breath caught as he recognized it instantly. It was the alley, the very place where he had found them. The camera zoomed in, revealing an old, rusted trash bin, the one that had once been their cradle on that fateful night. The audience murmured, some gasping at the heartbreaking sight. A woman's voice began narrating over the footage. 20 years ago, a detective named Samuel Hayes finished his shift, unaware that his life was about to change forever. In an abandoned alley, he found 2 newborn twin girls left to die in a trash bin. Instead of walking away, he chose to save them, not just in that moment, but for a lifetime. The screen transitioned, now showing photos, memories Samuel had kept private, now displayed for the world to see. Hope and Grace's first day of school. Their birthdays. Samuel teaching them how to ride bikes. Grace practicing the piano, her tiny fingers barely reaching the keys. Hope falling asleep with her head on his shoulder. A medical textbook open in her lap. Samuel felt his knees weaken. He had never expected recognition, never wanted it, but now, the world was seeing his life's greatest story. Hope turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. Dad, we didn't just invite you here to honor you. She took a deep breath. We have something to give you. A man in a suit stepped forward, carrying an envelope. He handed it to Samuel with a respectful nod. With trembling hands, Samuel opened it. His eyes scanned the document, his heart pounding. Then, he froze. His breath hitched. He read the words again, and suddenly, the world around him faded. What they had just given him was something beyond his wildest dreams. Samuel's hands shook as he gripped the paper, his eyes darting over the words again and again. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. His throat went dry as he finally found his voice. Hope, Grace, what is this? Hope placed a gentle hand over his. Dad, it's real. Grace nodded, her voice trembling with emotion. This is our way of giving you even a fraction of what you gave us. Samuel looked back down at the document, still in disbelief. It was a deed to a breathtaking home by the lake, surrounded by acres of peaceful land, a place he could finally rest, where he could wake up to quiet sunrises instead of police sirens. And that wasn't all. Attached to the deed was a letter, signed by the board of directors at the city's most prestigious hospital. It was an official retirement fund, fully paid. Hope stepped closer, her eyes glistening. I'm going to be a doctor soon. Dad, you spent your whole life saving people, including us. Now it's time for you to rest, to finally live for yourself. Grace gave him a tearful smile. And the house? It has a music room. You always said you loved listening to me play but never had time to sit and enjoy it. Now you will. Samuel's vision blurred as he looked at his daughters, the same girls he had found trembling in a trash bin all those years ago. The same girls he had raised, protected, sacrificed everything for, and now, they had given him something he never thought possible. A future, a new beginning. A chance to finally stop running and start living. Overwhelmed, he let out a shaky breath and did the only thing he could. He pulled them both into his arms, holding them as if he never wanted to let go. "I didn't do any of this for a reward," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I did it because I love you." Hope and Grace held him even tighter. "And that's why you deserve everything, Dad." The cameras flashed. The audience wiped their tears. The world had just witnessed a full-circle miracle. But for Samuel Hayes, it wasn't about the house, the money, or the recognition. His greatest reward was standing right in front of him. Hope, Grace, his daughters. And for the first time in decades, Samuel allowed himself to breathe, to rest, to finally go home. The end.